Mimi, so great to have you at Poster Studio. I'm so honored to have you as my guest.
Thank you.
How are you today?
I'm honestly so good. Thank you so much for having me. From the minute we met, I have been counting the days. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And what brought you to Dubai this time? So it's interesting because we're talking empathy today, and it's interesting to hear from you where we are with empathy in Dubai.
Oh, we're growing for sure. My journey started here about 5 years ago. Mm-hmm. So every time I come back and I see a little bit of progress in people understanding empathy and what we do, I'm super excited. So this time I came for a large HR conference, actually in the energy sector. So we were at the Ritz-Carlton yesterday in their beautiful conference centre. And part of my work was to talk about empathy in the corporate world and why we need more of it.
Is this conversation evolving compared to, for example, the conversation you had 5 years ago, let's say?
Yes, I mean, so much so. I guess partly because I'm evolving, right? So you can't help but learn and grow as you go on your own journey. But yes, definitely the world. When I started, Lara, nobody knew what empathy was. It was just me in like a bedroom in a villa in Springs, all alone, talking about empathy to the world. But now, yes, it's massively changed. I mean, I think that the understanding of why we need connectivity, why we need to understand each other, why we need to listen to each other is shifting. And that's in the media, that's in global rhetoric and politics, in the business world, but also in my own micro world. People find me now for this work, right? Which never happened in the beginning. So now, every time somebody like you invites me to come and talk about it, I take that as a sign that we're making progress, right? That the world wants to reconnect, and there's never been a time when we need it more.
Definitely. So most of us know empathy till now as something we're born with.
Yes.
But, listening to you probably, like when I was getting ready for this interview, I was also listening to a few other, probably psychological sort of overviews about empathy and how to develop it and practice it. And it turns out it is a set of skills, right?
Yeah.
So maybe you can introduce us more into, so what are those sets of skills, and are we born with all those, or we're different as human beings?
Yes. You're right, we're born with it. So it is probably the question I get asked most, which is, but Mimi, do you just have more empathy than everybody else, right? Because you talk about it all the time. But the answer is no. We are all born with empathy. It's built into your prefrontal cortex in your brain. This is a pro-evolutionary skill set. So we evolved as human beings to have empathy, to be able to connect with each other. Because fundamentally, we're pro-social species. We need each other. We don't do well when we're alone. So this is a skill set, and it is not a soft skill for anybody who's asking. Hard to find, hard to master, hard to maintain, has a hard impact on workplaces, leadership, communities, schools. So this is a skill set that we need to connect with each other, to understand, to be able to build community, to find our place in the world, because to be human is to be seen. And fundamentally, empathy is our ability to see each other.
Interesting, because I was gonna ask next. I've heard it somewhere. So empathy is about how people connect, and the lack of empathy is about how people are disconnected.
Yes.
Right? But how do we connect? What are those, skills or probably abilities or things that we're born with help us to connect better?
Empathy sits predominantly in our subconscious. It's very natural, actually, to connect with people, right? Body language, eye contact, how you express yourself, tone of voice, how you are when you're around other people. But fundamentally, the backbone to empathy is curiosity. It's listening. So if someone says to me, how do I empathize more with my teenage daughter or my boss or my mother-in-law, right? Whoever you want to reconnect with, start with listening. Listening is this amazing, magical ability that we all have, and yet we don't practice it. But like any skill set, you have to practice, because practice creates permanence. In fact, those are the last 3 words of my first book, practice creates permanence. We need to practice. We teach empathy and listening to our children. So when we have small children, we're constantly saying, listen to mummy, listen to daddy, listen to teacher. But as they grow, we stop saying it. And then we stop teaching it at the moment. I'm going to change it, but we don't teach it in schools. We don't teach it in university. And until recently, we don't teach it in the workplace. So social media is full of people talking about speaking up. Find your voice, speak more, podcast more, right? Find your voice and use your voice. And yes, let's use our voices. But have we forgotten that if nobody's listening, what's the point in having a voice, right? So we're only solving for half of the problem. We're encouraging more people to speak, but we're not teaching people how to listen. So fundamentally, if you want to know how to create more empathy, if you want to understand people, particularly people unlike you have to listen.
But then you need to also probably ask the right questions, probably, so understand what this person is about and what is the right, probably thing that defines this particular individual, so that you could ask the right question and then listen. I think empathy is such a complex topic. So when I was getting ready for this conversation, I was like, there are so many angles that we can approach this from, right? So the question that bothers me, for example, why doesn't it always work? Not empathy, but I mean, if we're born with the same amount, with the same abilities, or probably, the same reactions within the brain, that we're all capable of being empathic. Why aren't we? Yeah, why aren't we?
It's a great question. There's 2 real reasons, Lara. The enemies of empathy, there's 2 of them. So we have 2 great enemies. One of them is high stress, and the other is low time. And if anyone listening, if you asked anybody out there, put your hand up if you have high stress or low time, particularly in Dubai, right? I mean, people say that New York is a city that never sleeps, but they've just not been to Dubai, right? So we live in cities, we live in a global environment where we never have enough time, and we are living in a stress culture. We have a high cortisol-driven life. When you are under time pressure and when your brain is in a state of stress, and we can talk a little bit about neuroscience, you actually can't empathize. So when the brain is under pressure, what happens is so our brains, they're very fast, evolutionary, brilliant things. And we've evolved in many ways. In fact, I saw data yesterday that showed that our IQ increases every 7 years. So they've got data to show. We're just getting smarter all the time, okay? But what the brain hasn't worked out is how to decipher different types of stress. So from a kind of reptilian brain point of view, like when we were cavemen and women, when there was a saber-toothed tiger coming to attack us, our brain would respond with something called the fight or flight response to help you either fight off the tiger or flight, run away, right, to survive.
Yeah.
And in order to do that, the brain will release hormones, cortisol, adrenaline, into the body so that the right parts of the body are activated to fight or flight. So your lungs, so you can breathe faster, your legs, your arms to fight, your heart, so it can beat faster and help you escape. But in so doing, it takes that blood, that energy, as it were, away from the thinking parts of your brain, because you don't need to think much when you're fighting off a tiger, right? Now, as our brains have evolved, it doesn't know that your stress is because your boss is bullying you, or because you don't feel seen in the workplace, or because you're burnt out. The brain doesn't know that. So the brain still responds in the same way and hopes that you fight or flight. We're not meant to live in stress. Stress is a good thing. It literally helps you survive, but it's supposed to be short-lived. So when all of that energy is in different parts of your body, it's actually impossible to empathize. So because it's a skill set, it is a choice. This is something you can choose to use. But at the same time, if you are in a high-pressure job environment or lifestyle, it's actually physiologically impossible for you to activate that part of your brain and use it. So, Lara, if you've ever had an argument with someone, right? Everybody has. And then later you've thought, why did I say that? Yeah. Why did I say that? Why you said it was because your brain was literally not fully functioning at that time. So high stress, low time, amongst other things, globalization, moving, isolation, loneliness. But fundamentally, we're just too stressed to empathize most of the time.
Yeah. So now, as I was listening to you now, I was like, okay, so how do you choose something that allows you to be more empathic at the time when you most probably would usually choose to like fight? For example, if you're having an argument, like imagine if your day is stressed, or for example something that is very critical for you didn't work, etc., and then you're getting into a situation, I don't know, with at a reception, I don't know, as some at the reception getting a flight, I don't know, anything, and then a person cannot help you, not because he doesn't want to help you, but because, I don't know, something doesn't work from their side. And then that's the situation where you're releasing your stress, like, and you choose to argue, and you choose to be probably not empathic at all, although probably empathy would help in this situation. So how to choose the right sort of ability within your body physiologically when you're stressed. Is it possible at all?
It is, but you have to be very aware. And I would say in environments like you're discussing, a really high moment of stress, like you sort of mentioned there, you might be at an airport, or something's late, or there's a deadline, or somebody's in danger. As a mum, if my child is about to, I don't know, fall or something, when you're in that heightened stress, the only way to really be able to bring your empathy back to yourself is through awareness, is through slowing down, right? So we live in a very fast world, right? And social media encourages us to be fast all the time. Everybody wants to win tomorrow, or maybe today, but nobody's willing to wait, right? So the only way to really activate that is to slow down. And one of the best ways to do that is through breathing. So if you can take slow, deep breaths, you'll learn it in classes, yoga classes, meditation classes. That breathing connects the brain and the body. So as many people know, there is science behind that. If you want to take control of your brain and of those hormones, you have to send it physiological signals. It's okay. The stress is gone. You are not in danger. You have to tell your brain that. And the best way to do that is through something like box breathing or any form of yogic breathing. In order to bring yourself back down to earth. It works brilliantly with children. So my little girl, she's 6, and if she's very stressed or anxious about something, and I say to her, what do you think we can do to calm down, even in her stress? Breathing, she says. She knows, right? She knows, yes, you have to breathe. It is not just something for the yoga mat. It is a skill for life, and it will help you, even in the boardroom. I say often to people, if you can put your feet flat on the floor, and breathe. Nobody need know. Nobody else in the boardroom need know. You can bring that cortisol down. So you can bring a little bit more attention to that communication.
So basically, so whenever we're in stress and whenever we're getting a situation of an argument, so we need to convince our brain, or to at least to bring attention to our brain, this is not a danger.
Yes.
And we're safe.
Yeah.
Whatever technique it takes a certain individual, right? Somebody will breathe, somebody will probably, I don't know, I mean, screaming is probably not that social, but I don't know. So we've got different tempos, right?
Yeah.
And so if we convince our brain that this is not a danger, this is going to help us to get into a more empathic state. I'll give you an example, for example. I've heard a few examples, like we all been in a situation when you get on a flight.
Yes.
And you're about to spend another 2-3 hours, maybe 8 hours with a nice movie, reading, maybe you're all alone. And then, I've heard it in one of their TED Talks, right? And then a baby screams.
Yes.
And the baby can't stop,
Yep.
right? And I'll be honest with you, I've been to situations like that until my first flight with my kid, the first one, and then the second one. And now I don't feel anything but empathy to parents who are with the kids, and because it's not easy. But how to stay connected to people, how to stay empathic in the situation, because we have different reactions, right, to situations like that.
Well, empathy is fundamentally based on imagination. The way the brain processes empathy is to be able to imagine the reality from somebody else's point of view. So you'll often hear people say that empathy is about standing in the shoes of another or seeing the world as someone else does. So the reason you are able to empathize more with that mum with the screaming baby is because your shortcut to imagination has got smaller. It's easier now for you to imagine what she's feeling. And like you said, all of us mums that have been on planes know it, right? You're desperate for your child to be happy, but you're also desperate not to upset everybody else in the plane. So empathy is based on imagination. That doesn't mean that we can't empathize with people that have been through situations that you haven't, right? So it is very possible for you to empathize with people who are living through or experiencing things that you never have. But it just means that empathy is a little bit, let's say, harder work.
Yeah.
You have to inquire more. So when I interview people on my show or I meet people at conferences and they tend to tell me their life stories, I have to ask a few more questions to be able to understand that reality. And I'll give you an example, Lara. I met a lady yesterday at a conference here from elsewhere in the region, and she was asking me for some advice. She has 2 young team members who are very open with her that they are just at work for the salary. They don't want to grow. They don't want to perform. They just want the money, right? And she was asking me, should I feel guilty that I can't fix them, that I can't make them want more? And I said to her, well, why do you think they should want more? And she stopped and she knew where I was going. And she said, well, because surely that's why you come to work. And I said, well, have you ever asked them? She said, well, no, not really. And I said, well, you have to start there, understanding that just because you think, and many of us do, that we should want to be promoted, we should want more, we should want to grow and win. Empathy is the ability to say, well, they don't, and that's okay, right? That's their reality. For those 2 people, they don't want any more than that. And who are we as a society to tell them otherwise? So that takes a little bit more work for this lady, for example, to really put aside her own ego, her own judgments, and those are not always bad things. Judgments are natural. And just say, that's okay. What other people want is different from what I want. So it takes a little bit more work, but it can be done.
It can be done. What I've heard from this example as well, even if you can't imagine their reality, you can still be empathic or choose a behavior that will be more empathic. For example, in this case, it could be allowing them to be how they are, right? If they're performing within their job role in a good way, like, why would you be thinking about their motivations, right? So probably I'm just trying to sort of think of what are the ways to be more empathic when you're in a situation like that. What is empathy to you, though? Like, if you would explain it from Mimi's perspective, what is empathy for you?
I can tell you in 2 words. It's perspective taking. Empathy, like you touched on earlier, it can be really complicated. There are many specialists out there, particularly in America, who are teaching many forms of empathy. There's different types of cognitive and emotional and compassionate, and there's many definitions. But for me, Lara, until we have mastered the simplest form, which is perspective taking, just understand how somebody else sees the world, then let's not complicate with everything else. We have our work cut out for us, filling the gaps today. What we know about empathy is that when empathy is low, the isms, racism, ageism, sexism, ableism, all of them are high. If we want to reconnect society, if we really want to pull people back together, if we want to overcome the loneliness endemic, which, by the way, is killing us. So loneliness is now as dangerous as smoking 15 cigarettes a day.
Wow.
If we want to stand a chance to reconnect our people in our world, we have to start with perspective taking, right? Empathy is not about judgment. It's not about agreement. Okay, so the hardest question I ever got asked was by the Metropolitan Police Service in London. And they asked me, Mimi, can we empathize with a terrorist who has just blown up a bridge? And of course I stopped in my tracks. But the answer is yes. Are you going to agree with that behavior? No. Are you going to like it? Most Definitely not. But if you track back the life, the belief system of that person who got to the point where they made a decision to do something like that, you can empathize. You can understand. You will never agree. You may not like it, but you can understand it. And that's what we have to teach our society and our children, is how to understand the perspective of somebody else.
That's very, very significant. I think it's super important, I think. And I was going to ask you as one of the next questions, we tend to associate empathy or the need for empathy to someone who we consider to be underdog. Let's say somebody who's in an obvious sufferings or in an obvious victimized situation, which is absolutely needed, I think. But if we're talking about people who are externally, let's say successful, ambitious, who've got the desire to be promoted, to be at the power, how does empathy work towards them? Probably, how can you be empathic to someone who is super successful and probably, like, I don't know, causes all different sorts of feelings? Yeah,
Lara, everybody deserves empathy. And again, very recently we had this discussion on a panel discussion in a corporate event. We think, like you just mentioned, that empathy is reserved for people we must empathize with as leaders, as family leaders, community leaders. But the reality is empathy goes up and down and side to side. Everybody deserves it. To be in a workplace, whether you are at a junior level or a senior level, empathy is the ability to connect with those around you. And absolutely, even if the leader is like you said, a very successful, maybe it's a celebrity, right? A very successful person that on paper has everything they ever need. Why would you not need to understand that person, right? This is humanity's data set. This is our ability to be human. So there is nobody that doesn't need empathy. In fact, we are born needing that. So we need to be seen and heard in order to justify our existence. So when we talk about empathy, we are talking about surviving as a human race, not thriving, surviving. Very quickly, if we left this podcast recording together, we walked out of the studio and nobody looked at you, Lara. Nobody noticed you, nobody saw you, nobody mentioned anything to you. Statistically, within 1 minute, your nervous system would shift. You would begin to think, is there something wrong with me? Did I do something wrong? Am I okay? We can't not be seen, right? It will literally change the way that your physiological system exists. If 2 babies are born of equal illness, the one that receives empathy will survive longer than the other. As humans, we need to be seen and heard in order to survive. So whoever you are with, whatever level they are, however successful they are, as you mentioned, empathy is not for the underdog. Empathy is not reserved for those that need help. Empathy is not compassion. Compassion is a wonderful thing, but compassion is an emotion and an action. Empathy is a skill set, and everybody needs you to use it with them.
Am I right to call it a set of choices? So, for example, a set of choices that you can make in a certain situation where you can, for example, choose fight or flight, or you can choose, for example, compassion. You can choose listening. You can choose, I don't know, you can choose not fighting, but just staying there, right? So it's a set of different choices, which might include actions, which might include reactions as well. So am I right to think like that? Because for me, it's an eye-opening conversation, frankly. Because not because, but we tend to think like empathy is such a buzzword from good and from the perspective that yes, we all talk about empathy, but do we understand what we need to be able to really apply it to our lives? Am I right to think that this is a set of choices?
To empathize, yes. Empathy is a choice. As I said earlier, this is something you can choose to use. You can choose to listen to someone. You can choose to make eye contact. You can choose to actively engage in what somebody's saying in the boardroom, in a corridor, in a taxi. or when you get your coffee in the morning, right? How often people say, "Hi, how are you? I'm fine, thanks. How are you?" That is not a conversation, guys, right? That is not a connection, right? Next time you are in a coffee shop and the lady or the gentleman, asks you for your order or passes you your coffee, if you stop and make eye contact and really ask them how they are, "I'm fine, thank you. How are you?" They will stop. They will literally, I do it every day. They will stop in their tracks and they will look at you and they'll go, "Oh, me? Yeah, I'm fine. Yeah, I'm good, thank you." Right? It's a choice. You have to actively make that choice. Fight or flight is not a choice, right? Fight or flight is subconscious. The response that your brain makes to the fear of danger is subconscious. You can't stop that. But as I said earlier, with things like breathing, with awareness, you can come down from that panic state, right? To manage anxiety. Butterflies, for example, before going on stage or going to an event or doing anything that makes you feel anxious, is something you can choose to overcome. But the actual response, no, that's natural. But how you respond to it, yes, that's definitely a choice.
And yeah, we can practice choosing that, right? We just need to understand, why do we need this? And my next question to you, what are the benefits of being empathic or choosing to act with a more empathy?
They are endless. A better world in so many ways. If we start with life, with social benefit, people that are connected live longer. People that are connected are able to have stronger immune systems. When we feel that we belong, when we feel that we're seen and heard, because our system, our body and our brain is working together, we see lower levels of cardiovascular disease. We see lower levels of diabetes type 2. We are able to survive and thrive through critical illness. So people recovering from forms of cancer, when they are supported and they're not lonely, when they're not disconnected, they're more able to fight those diseases. In schools, we see lower bullying. We see lower levels of exclusion. In the workplace, I say to my audiences all the time, there are literally endless benefits. We see higher productivity, higher output per capita, higher profit per capita, lower absenteeism, lower presenteeism. There's statistics all over the place. So 79% of people say that they will work longer hours out of choice for an empathetic leader. 48% are more innovative. So the data is endless. More empathy is good for our world and it's good for our workplace. When we are connected, we are stronger. We are able to be healthier. Our marriages will last longer. We fundamentally avoid conflict. And I always wonder, Lara, could we stop wars? I don't think on any type of official media I could make a claim, but I like to believe possibly we could, that peacekeeping would be improved if we learn to listen.
How? I've been looking at your Instagram and a piece of information that you are sharing about empathy and how to develop and practice it. And you were given an examples of some of the data, right, that demonstrates that if the environment, be it a workplace, we'll still touch upon the workplaces and the schools. I'm just leaving it until the second half of our conversation. But using data that demonstrates that if the environments are more empathic, certain levels of productivity, or probably less bullying, etc., are achieved. How can we measure empathy? And how can we measure, that this is particularly linked to people being more empathic?
Empathy, like any emotional skill set, it's not a direct measurable reality. It's not like you can fill a cup of water and see how much is in or out. Having said that, we do have data that shows that we're living through what's called an empathy deficit. For 30 years, our empathy has been declining, and we now have 48% less of this evolutionary skill set than we once had. In terms of measuring its comeback and its increase, you will see the ability to measure it when our societies become more connected. when we see racism reduce and segregation reduce, bullying, cyber or otherwise, when we see societies and communities coming together more and able to solve problems without aggression or violence. So the response to higher levels of empathy will show you your results. But in other ways, there are very simple, beautiful ways to measure empathy. And I want to tell you a small story that comes to mind. Just a few weeks ago, I was in Africa, in South Africa, in a very dangerous, underprivileged community. And I was teaching or sharing with teachers how to use empathy in schools and in their communities to fight violence. And I asked the audience, if you were able to increase empathy like I've been telling you today, how would you know? What would it look like? And I caught the eye of this young teacher, this young African teacher. She was very shy. And I said to her, tell me, what do you think? And she said, if we had more empathy in our community, we might smile more. And I thought, there we go. That's all of my work in one word. How would we measure more empathy? Well, we would smile more, right? Which is, of course, an oversimplification. But my point is, when there's more empathy, we're more human. We're happier. There's more joy. We're more connected. We're closer to who we were meant to be.
Yeah, so it's basically, you will see that there's more empathy. So this will become more obvious. And I think there's still so much work to do from your side, and what you're doing. Actually, the more I get familiar with, let's say, your content and your message, I understand what you're doing, and it's a great impact. I think you're creating that awareness. You're getting people to talk about it deeper from all angles, to understand it's not just one word. It's a personal choice in each and every situation. But to be able to make that choice, you need to have an awareness of how you as a human benefit and how society benefits from that.
Yeah.
Interesting that you are working a lot with the kids, right? Kids is where we need to start. Do we need to start with kids or with the adults?
Somewhere, everywhere.
We need to start anywhere. So what is the way for, something like an empathy curriculum to be included into your school curriculum, let's say, or kindergarten probably?
Yeah. It's funny, Lara, I said I would never do it. For a couple of years, I had a friend here in Dubai, actually, who works with what's called social emotional learning, of which empathy is part, which is teaching children how to use their emotions, name their emotions, communicate better with each other, empathize better. She asked me for 2 years to come and do a workshop with the children she teaches. And I kept saying, I can't. I'm not. I don't know. I'm just comfortable on a stage, and I'm a mum. So I spend a lot of time with small children. But then I had a moment. She asked me again to come and do a workshop, and I did. And I did this workshop with her, and we had around about 11 children from 5 to 10 years old on a virtual room in Dubai and in India predominantly. And the smallest little boy in this room was 5, and he was tiny. He really was a little boy. And we did this workshop about empathy. And when I do my corporate presentations, I often use the word superpower, that empathy is a corporate superpower, or a leadership superpower, or a negotiation superpower. But I hadn't used it in this workshop. We had been reading stories and talking about characters and how would you feel if you were the lion, and how do you think the lion feels, and all of these examples that we use to help children understand empathy. And then at the end of this workshop, I asked the room, what did you learn about empathy today? And they all answered. And when it came to this little boy, this 5-year-old little boy, he said, Miss, what I learned, he said, empathy is a bit like a superpower. And I nearly fell off my beanbag, because I took that as a sign from the universe that actually I can do this. I can create content that will help children and that they will understand and be able to take forward. So from that, I went away, I worked with some teachers and some coaches, and created a primary school empathy curriculum for Asia and the Middle East, for the emerging worlds fundamentally. And I do spend a lot of time now giving that away for free. It has no cost to teach teachers how to bring empathy into the classroom. How do you help children ask those questions? How do you teach them to listen to the emotions of others, to understand that because I'm happy, mummy might not be, or because my brother's angry, that doesn't mean I need to be. Those are skills that our children need to learn. And so now we have a curriculum that helps teachers predominantly explain those things. And that is a mixture of reading, which is a huge path to empathy, right? Understanding characters and imagination, and role modeling. Because in the end, if you as a parent listening to this want to help your children or teenagers be more empathic, you have to role model it. Because as humans, we learn by repetition, by those around us. So that's what we're doing. And I really hope it's going to make an impact. Is it
complicated process from society standpoint and probably different legislation standpoint to implement it into the existing curriculums? Do you face anything that, like you would say, I wish it was easier for me to just come and do that? Or
no, I mean, I think in all of my work, what I wish I had more reach all the time, every day, right? Because fundamentally, the more people that speak about empathy, the more empathy the world will have. So I don't think it's difficult to convince people to do these things. There's very little legislation that wants to stop people improving communication and human connection. But I think it also helps that I work outside of Europe and America predominantly, where there is far more tape, I think, around educational systems. And I work predominantly in communities with this work. So I'm taking this to often quite underprivileged or just government publicly funded schools in Africa, Asia, Middle East. So again, there is less tape around that. Fundamentally, what's surprising, Lara, is that in so many parts of our world, the education system and our teachers, the people responsible for bringing up the next generation, are so underfunded and so under-resourced that, quite frankly, any content that helps them and is being given to them, they say yes. So no, I haven't really had any barriers. It's just about reach. I just have to keep every day waking up and doing it again.
Is there any right age, let's say, for kids to start learning about empathy? Or is it, is it too late to speak about empathy with a teenager, for example, versus, let's say, a 5-year-old?
Listen, I think the earlier you can do it, the better. Because again, this is built into our brains. There is research out of the US that shows babies as young as 8 hours old are able to use their mirror neurons, which are the neurons in the brain responsible for empathizing. So we are born able to do it. So the sooner you do it, the more you do it with your young children, the better. My little girl who is 6 is very able to use this, of course, because she lives with me. I give her no choice. That is not, I don't believe that is her DNA. That is her environment, right? That is because she lives with somebody who lives and breathes empathy every day. So the younger you can teach them, the easier that's going to be for them. But absolutely you can teach it to your teenagers, and absolutely you can teach it to your colleagues and anybody else. This is a choice. So it's about awareness and education and probably inspiration. I think my role in the world, I hope, is just to inspire people to do this. If you can capture people's imaginations and their hearts, if you can help people. I mean, yesterday in Dubai, I was in front of 250 of the most corporate people across the Gulf. And if you can capture them, you can capture anyone. So
I've got one question about kids, and then we switch to actually corporate environments, which I'm also very, very much interested in. Does it keep? So, for example, somehow I think there's a perception that if a kid is more empathic, let's say, if a child is more empathic or softer in terms of articulating his or her emotions, as well as understanding somebody else's emotions. But life sometimes is about surviving. So does it also reserve, or does he compromise on his, let's say, ability to survive in a tougher situation where probably he needs to get that fight or flight mode? So what's your perspective on that?
No, I absolutely think that this is a life skill, and I'm going to tell you why. Just last week, in Malaysia, where I live, my daughter was confronted by a mother in the mall where her school is.
Yeah.
Because in Asia, we have loads of schools and malls. And this mother was extremely angry about something. I wasn't there at the time. She was with another caregiver. And this mother created a very upsetting environment, including for my daughter. And somebody called me to tell me this had happened. And when she came home a little while later, I was ready to have a very upset little girl. Because as you said, she's very emotional, she's emotionally intelligent. But you know what happened was the absolute reverse. So she came into the house, and again, for the audience, she's 6 years old. And I asked her, what happened on your way home from school? And she told me. And I said, did that make you cry? And she said it did, because I was a little bit scared. And I said, well, why were you scared? And actually, that was another story. But she said because she'd heard that in Asia, if children are naughty, they can go to prison. So I obviously helped her understand that wasn't the case. But she was crying because she was scared of that. When I asked her, why do you think that happened? Lara, honestly, I promise you, she said this word for word. She said to me, Mummy, I think probably when that mummy was a little girl, nobody listened to her. So today she thinks she needs to shout in order for people to hear her. I mean, I called my own mum that night and I said, my daughter's just said this to me. I mean, I had nothing to say to her except, probably you're right, darling. So
I get emotional about situations like
I
that.
was too.
Yeah.
So for anyone that says, especially in this region, is empathy a soft skill? No. Empathy helps us understand our world. Empathy enabled that little girl to walk out of a very aggressive environment and come home and say to me, we should probably understand her life a little bit more, Mum, because probably nobody ever heard her at 6 years old. So no, teach your kids. It's going to help them.
No, I think, it is definitely make our kids more resilient. When you were telling this, I remember my son once, he told me something wise, because they're doing some, not empathy, but they're doing some emotional lessons at school. Like they are talking about emotions. It's part of their curriculum. And he's not competitive, I think, in the sense of it. Like they were participating in a competition, like a team of 5 or something. And they lost. And the boy in his team went into tears for like really, really upset, really, disappointed about the fact that they lost, etc. And my son was like, also like showing the feeling. And my husband is like, listen, it's okay. You will win another competition. He's like, Daddy, I'm not upset because we lost. I'm upset because he's sad. And I found that really, really empathic. And that's like, I'm like, this is the next level of emotions, honestly. And it doesn't make him weaker, right?
It will never make him weaker. It will only make him stronger. Our world needs leaders who can understand the pain of others, and not just the pain, the joy of others.
Yeah.
That is how we lead. Right? When people feel that you see them and hear them, whether it's emotional or otherwise, they follow. We need to be surrounded by people that understand us. So your son has an amazing skill set. You must nurture it in him, because it will help him. It will help him lead. It will help him win. It will help him
stay more resilient, isn't it?
Manage exactly that resilience. And I think that's a very special thing.
I think it's a very important part of the conversation, because that goes to show empathy from like a 360 angle. We tend to think that empathy is, as you mentioned, is a soft skill, or is it something that makes you a little softer, a little more sensitive? But in fact, it makes you stronger, right? It makes you more resilient.
And let's wonder, I've never wondered this before, but listening to you, whoever called this a soft skill, probably men in a generation where they didn't have any. So it was probably, I'm assuming, I have no research for this, an easy way to push away those skills when the people that needed them didn't have them. Oh, it's soft. I don't need that. Right? But what we know today is it isn't. And whoever called them soft skills in the first place needs to, change the rhetoric, because this is not a soft skill. This is about hard environments and hard realities, and giving human beings the skills they need to do to succeed together.
What kind of what sort of awareness you're bringing to the workplaces, to the corporate environment? What do you think our corporate environments need to be able to integrate this awareness, this understanding, and eventually these choices into the environment we are in? Because corporate environment is tough,
really tough, and I think I'm sometimes quite naive to how tough it is. People tell me stories most weeks that I cannot get my head around. It's amazing to me that these things still happen, because in this tiny bubble that many of your listeners, and me included, live in, we would be led to believe that we're getting better at this conversation around mental health and bullying in the workplace. And of course we are. There's huge progress going on. But in the wider world, there is also huge bullying going on. There is discrimination and isolation and all kinds of terrible behaviour all over the place. So the corporate world does need to shift, but the good news is that awareness is rising, because if it wasn't, people like me and everybody else that is in this space working to improve wellness and well-being and mental health and psychological safety, and there are thousands of us, have roles and work to do. So it is changing, Lara. People are aware of it. I take on myself to educate the corporate world about the impact on performance, because that's the easiest way to get into the mindsets of the leaders of today, which is to say that we have an $8.8 trillion problem. $8.8 trillion in lost productivity due to disengagement, disconnection, presenteeism. 23% of the global workforce is engaged. So what that means is that over 70% of our working population is disengaged for 5/7 of their week. And that equals $8.8 trillion in lost productivity. In the UAE, where we are today, last year, in 1 year, that equates to $10.4 million. Right? This is huge, huge money that we're losing because of that lack of connection. So how do we do it? We take the data to these organizations and we tell them, you cannot afford not to listen to your people, but also to the problem at large.
Does it help? Do you think?
It helps. Yesterday, in the event I was in, I finished speaking at 11. I finally left the hotel at 5:30. So for those over 5 hours, I was with corporate leaders here in the Gulf, many men, because people often ask me, are you able to reach male leaders as well as a female leader, who want to make the change? So yes, it helps. Day by day, step by step. Most of my work, in fact, all of my work, is in Asia and the Middle East, in a region that is growing beyond all pace. And yes, it helps. People want to know how to fix it. We have 55% of people today say they want to resign in the next 6 months. Half of your team, for anybody listening, half of your team is considering resignation. So yes, it helps to reconnect people, help you keep your people in place.
What do you? How do you help corporates apart from creating that awareness? Do you offer anything else as a coach, probably, or probably less scale kind of activities that help them on a daily, day-to-day sort of to make the right choices, to make the right decisions? So, is there anything else that you're doing apart from a big work of creating awareness, just to understand?
Yeah, you mentioned coaching. I'm not a coach, but we do a lot of coaching. I think you're absolutely right. You have to start with awareness. So whether that's, books, keynotes, whatever that is, podcasts, whatever it is to create the awareness. You then need to have some way to activate the awareness. So whether that's a workshop or a masterclass or a series of interventions, where the people in those teams are able to access this insight, this intel around human behavior, psychology of workplaces, the needs to create performance and consistency in those teams, well-being. And then you need the opportunity to practice.
Of course.
Right? Because so many people come to me and say, Mimi, I came to your masterclass, I'm sold, I get it. I went back to the workplace, I took it into my review, and then my employees started crying and I didn't know what to do, right? People need the opportunity to practice those things because these are not easy skill sets. And you know what, Lara? I feel very sorry for the corporate world because leaders today have more pressure than at any other time in history. Not only are they responsible for the P&L and the growth and the board and the stakeholders and the shareholder value, but they also have to be responsible for the state of humanity and the well-being crisis that we're living under. So they're trying to hear their staff and manage well-being initiatives and pull people back into workplaces in some form and manage 4 generations. So first time in history, 4 generations in one workplace, right? Yeah. I can't tell you how many people tell me they don't know how to speak to Gen Z, right? So it is really tough to be a leader. We can't just keep throwing things at them and hoping that they can do it. Yeah. We have to help them. We have to help them practice and give them that format, that system within which they can grow in these skills as well.
Oh, absolutely. And I think, it's not easy to implement something, even though you consider it to be really prominent for, corporate environments. I mean, even from, marketing, content creation perspective, like you need to find a way because it's not easy to get this in. Although you can convince a leader, you can convince a team member, you can have a product to, let's say, to help them practice it or achieve that realization. Then how do you make it happen as well on the ground? Right, that's another one. So a question to you, what is so far your biggest outcome out of the work that you're doing with corporates, with schools, or probably with individuals? What are your biggest outcomes?
Wow. I say to people all the time that we have to slow down enough to see those moments of success, right? Those growth moments, because if you don't, they run away with you. But if I talk from a personal level, I think being on the BBC News was a huge moment for me. And Laura, it was very funny. I joined the waiting room on the BBC. They put you in like a digital waiting room. And the producer came on and said, "Are you ready? And do you have your sound?" and all those things. And then he said to me, "Just to remind you, Miss Nicklin, that the audience is 85 million. Live in my office, in my apartment." I mean, I felt like saying to him, you should probably empathize with your audience a bit more and never say that ever again. But that was a huge moment for me personally, but also I think for this conversation, because that day I had people at Wimbledon and people in Paris airport saying, "Mimi, you're on the TV," So yes, it was amazing for me to be on the news, but more so, empathy was on the news, right? And that is what this is about. This is about how do we reach more people with this message so that they will consider it in their workplaces, however, or lives, or societies, or communities, or schools, or African townships. It doesn't matter. How do we pull humanity back together? So I think that was an amazing moment for me in this conversation. When my book became a bestseller, that was, you got it, there it is. No, this is not a promotion. I have a new one coming out.
No, it's a beautiful design, by the way. I like the design a lot.
Oh, thank you. I wanted it to be very empathetic. It's very tactile. Like if you touch it, you'll feel it's debossed. Sure. And I wanted it to be the type of book that people wanted to touch, that it made them feel better.
Softening the edge. Yeah, I'm going to read that. Thank you for...
no, you're welcome.
For writing this book. Yeah, but the book is a great outcome, isn't it? And are you happy with the way the book sort of is creating impact all over the places where people are reading it?
I'm amazed. Honestly, every time somebody sends me a photo of it in some corner of the world, I'm amazed, right, where that book goes. I wrote it all alone in Dubai at a time when I think it was more therapy for me than anything else. I just had to write down the experience I was going through turning this business around and the role that empathy was playing. And I remember, Lara, someone said, "Why don't you turn it into a book?" And I kind of looked over my shoulder. I was like, who? Me? I can't write a book. Surely the only people that write books is like John Grisham and someone at Harvard. So I often say I'm an accidental author or an accidental entrepreneur. This was never really the plan. But when that book was eventually out in the world and when it became a bestseller, and now that I'm about to publish the second one and that publishers are interested in me, those moments are great moments in this conversation, because the lady who helped me publish that book, she believed in something before its time, right? Nobody was talking about that here. But today, when I talk to publishers about the second book and the third book, they already are aware. So that is a great moment because this conversation is rising. You can Google empathy and anything today, whatever you're passionate about. Education, cooking, golf, tech, business, leadership, whatever, you'll find thousands of pages. But that wasn't the case. Mm-hmm. So in my tiny microcosm, I'm helping elevate that conversation. So that in itself is probably my motivation.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to ask you, have you ever had any mentors or opinions that you were considering, or something that probably at some point of time crafted your understanding of empathy or where you need to move with this?
There is a coach here in Dubai. Her name is Tess Pereira. She's a phenomenal coach here. And I met her many years ago. And yes, she said something to me that changed my life. I met with her to try and understand a very complex business environment that was in the corporate world. I'd been in corporate, 15 years. And she asked me about my leadership style. And she said, can you explain how you are leading people through these times? And I said, I think with intuition. And I had always believed that, Lara. I had always believed that I was an intuitive leader and that intuition was what was helping me, do my work, be the career professional that I was. And Tess stopped me and she said, Mimi, is it intuition or is it empathy? And at the time, I remember thinking, no, it's not empathy. What's empathy got to do with it? But as I said, that one question changed my life. And I went away, I researched empathy, I discovered the empathy deficit, I discovered that the second biggest killer of our youth is suicide, and the impact that having 400 million people on the planet with depression is having on our workplaces and our world. And I started to write. And quite frankly, I've never stopped. So yes, there have been some phenomenal people that have asked me some phenomenal questions in my time. Have I ever had a mentor? No, not really. I am very passionate about mentoring. I have a few mentees. But probably my greatest mentor is my daughter, because she will tell me all the time what I'm doing right and what I'm doing wrong and what colour my hair should be and what colour dress I should wear. So
that's good to have somebody like that in the house,
I have her at all times.
No, it's amazing. And what's your sort of perspective in terms of where you're moving? So you've mentioned a little bit about the new books that you're planning to publish quite soon. So how do you see yourself, not as a leader, probably as an empathy advocate in the next few years? How do you feel this conversation is going to evolve?
I like to believe that it's speeding up all the time. People always ask me, what are your tips for success? And I always say patience and consistency, right? I get up every day to do this. I have for half a decade and I always will. Often you speak to an empty black box of social media and you wonder, is anybody listening? But you get up and you do it all again. I think that tenacity is probably one of our greatest skill sets of our time, just to keep going. Just keep going with that message. And within that context, I believe that this conversation is rising. I'm here with you today.
Yeah.
I get the opportunity to travel the world. I travel 2 or 3 times a month to speak to people, to organizations, to much of the Fortune 500, to countries as diverse as South Africa, the Czech Republic, the USA, all over the world, Turkey, to talk about empathy. So in terms of where this is going, I hope it continues to grow. But I think what's really important is that I remind myself and anyone listening that this is a 10-year journey and not a 10-minute one. Mm-hmm. We have to slow down. What's meant for you will come for you. And that's a very hard path to stay on. Because, of course, we always want more now, more reach and more success and more empathy and more kindness and less loneliness right now. But progress takes time. And for me, that's what keeps me going. Get up every day, do your work with intention and do it consistently. and hopefully it'll end up where it's meant to be.
Oh, absolutely. I absolutely believe that your work is very, very impactful, and the topic of empathy has become very significant for me to understand after a conversation with you, because I've never spoken to anyone about empathy in a granular way, let's put it this way, right? We always tend to think, okay, this is a buzzword. Okay, I think I understand what it is. But have you ever really tried to apply it into your everyday choices? And that's the work that you're doing.
That is what I want the world to understand, is that we're all more alike than we are different. So the things that pull us apart can so often feel so unsurmountably high, the things that make us different. But in reality, we're all far more alike than we are different. And I just want the world to think about that for a bit.
Amazing. Do you want anything specific your audience to do after listening to this conversation?
No, not really. I mean, what I want is for the world to be more connected. I would love for people to consider empathy a little more after hearing this. I would love for the next time that you meet a taxi driver or a barrister or anybody in the service industry anywhere around you, to take a second to really look at them, to really see them, and then to notice what happens to their face when they're seen. Because here in Dubai, unlike anywhere in the world, we are surrounded by people who help us every day, deliver things and open things and serve things and bring things and fix things. So what I would say to people is, are you seeing them? And if you think perhaps not enough, then give it a go and just see what difference that makes to our world. Because if we all do that, we will change the energy of a whole city.
I'm sure we will. I am sure. And thank you for sharing that message.
No, thank you for having me. Thank you for giving me the chance to talk about it. It's, as I said at the beginning, from the minute I met you, I wanted to have this conversation, and I feel quite emotional about it. It's been wonderful. Thank you for having me.